All right, so let's look at heart sounds. So heart sounds are important measures of basically what's going on with the heart. It's an indirect way of knowing how the heart is functioning. Hopefully it's a healthy situation. And I don't know if you've ever gone to the doctor, you're sitting there and they tell you, take a deep breath, respira profundamente. And then they're kind of moving the stethoscope around, trying to shift and move. And you think, man, they can't find my heartbeat or what, right? Well, what they're trying to do, they're trying to put that sort of the scope to pick up the most to find the most optimal location to diagnose the different valves, right? So the heart sounds are going to be corresponding to our valves. So here we have the aortic valve, aortic semilunar valve, pulmonary valve, pulmonary semilunar valve, the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve, and then the tricuspid valve. So by positioning the scope around, they pick up the most optimal sound that they can make sense of for each of these valves. Now the valves are going to generate the sounds, right? And I've never been able to hear the sound like that, but they describe it as a lub-dup sound. Lub-dup, lub-dup, lub-dup. So two sounds, a lub and then the dup. And both of these sounds are associated with the closing of heart valves. And I disagree with that term closing. Closing sounds too passive. You can close the door or you can slam the door. And to me, those valves are not just closing. Those valves are slamming. They're slamming so hard that you can actually hear the sound, right? So the first sound occurs as the AV valves slam and signify the beginning of systole, the contraction, right? Second sound occurs when the semilunar valves close at the beginning of ventricular diastole. So first, the lub is the slamming of the AV valves, and then the dup is the reverse slamming of the semilunar valves. And you should hear those normal sounds and the heart should function correctly. Now, if there is some sort of abnormal heart sound, that's typically what we term as murmurs. Murmurs can be various reasons. Typically, there's sort of some abnormal heart, or I should say abnormal valve closure. And depending on what other sounds we hear, right? I could spend a whole huge lecture on murmurs, but I'm just going to keep it very simple. We can tell kind of where the murmur is when it's sort of auditory in the lub-dup sort of sequence. So if we hear lub-dup, lub-dup, then we know the problem is at the semilunar situation, right? If we hear lub-dup, lub-dup, then we know that murmur would be in the sort of AV valves. So there can also be sort of heart myocardial issues. There can be holes in the myocardium where blood is kind of moving, not necessarily through the valves, but through actual holes between different chambers. And it can get kind of complex here. But just understand for now, we should hear two sounds, and those two sounds correspond to our valves slamming shut. And they can then be heard, in these different locations. So keep it short and sweet, nice and simple. And that's our discussion on heart sounds. So don't forget to integrate heart sounds to the valves, to all of that cardiac cycle event, and make sense of the whole thing. Yeah. Alrighty.